everybody, welcome to another episode of Scarpad's Comic Treks, where we discuss Star Trek and its various comic book iterations. And today we're discussing another Marvel comic. And we've talked about Marvel Comics before. Their first 18-issue run was a mixed bag, both in story and artwork, and it varied widely from issue to issue. And we got things that we used to see in the Gold Key comic book series, like ghosts and goblins and vampires. But we did have a few good tales mixed in. As I said, they only made 18 issues of it before losing the license for several years. And in this episode, we're going to talk about issue number 13 of Star Trek Comics that dealt with a mission to a planet where they get involved with Klingons, aliens, and of course, Dr. McCoy's daughter, Joanna. Now, Joanna's had a mixed life in Star Trek. Joanna started off in Star Trek as, in the Bible, as Dr. McCoy's daughter. And the writers wrote up a brief summation of her character. And it was planned all along to have an episode with Dr. McCoy's daughter, Delta, with McCoy leaving the mother and leaving Earth to join Starfleet. And it was planned for a third season episode. And when it came time to create the episode, Dr. McCoy's daughter was going to be the girl that wound up being Chekhov's girlfriend in The Way to Eden. And eventually that idea got scrapped totally, so that the girl would no longer be Dr. McCoy's estranged daughter, but a past love of Chekhov. So when it comes to Joanna McCoy's other appearances, she's made quite a few in the novel series, in books like Best Defense, Crisis on Centaurus, Spock Must Die, Planet of Judgment, sprinkled without. In the comic books, she was in this issue of Marvel Comics we discussed today, and she was also in an Untold Voyages issue, along with the miniseries from IDW called Star Trek Year 4, The Enterprise Experiment. But it was here where she got a start. And it ended up being one of the better issues of Marvel's initial run at Star Trek. So let's go ahead and take a look at this issue, number 13 of Star Trek from Marvel Comics. And when we come back, we'll wrap it up and we'll have a few other things to share with you. Okay, so let's have a look at the comic book. This comic was written by Martin Pascow, and Joe Brozowski and Tom Palmer did the lettering and the artwork. And it starts off with the Enterprise and the Klingons making a trip to a resort planet named Hephaestus. I guess they weren't going to Risa. And when they beam down, they find that the Klingons, who are also in orbit with them, have also beamed down. And the story progresses. Well, we first meet McCoy's daughter, who in the story hasn't seen Dr. McCoy for about 26 years, and she's engaged to be married with an older Vulcan gentleman that looks an awful lot like an old Spock here. And that's going to get McCoy's gather right there. So Kirk meets with the planet inhabitants, who happen to look like the monkeys from Planet of the Apes. And they find out that the Klingons are also wanting to meet with these inhabitants to set up mining rights. Well, of course, the Klingons also have a nefarious edge to them, and a Klingon commander named Clag is sparring with Kirk here to basically get the mining rights on the planet. And we find out in the story here that several murders are taking place, the first of which is involving a inhabitant that is being saved or being helped by Commander Chekhov, who seems to be a little, still prejudiced against Vulcans here, continuing over from the Day of the Dove, where his imagination brother was killed by the Klingons. So we find a little bit of prejudice going on here with Chekhov. So Chekhov gets into a fight with a Klingon that's harassing the inhabitant here for the location of the manufacturing facility. And they get into a good brawl here, and it finds out that later in the tale that the person that they were fighting over has a snapped neck, and they don't know whether Chekhov did it or the Klingon did it. And of course we know Chekhov didn't do it. Meanwhile, we get several scenes of Kirk and McCoy, getting a drink here on the planet, and McCoy's starting to talk to Kirk about what's going on, and he sees his daughter for the first time. At first, his daughter's doesn't even know if that's her father. He hasn't seen him in like 20, 25, 26 years. And of course, McCoy instantly doesn't like the Vulcan who's dating his daughter, and shades of his arguments with Spock occur. I really like the artwork in this issue. As I said in the earlier part of the review, the artwork in this comic is really hit and miss, and this happens to be, pretty nice in this issue. And the story is just phenomenal. I mean, probably the best story of all the issues, and that's why I chose to look at this one first. So there's several scenes of McCoy going through his past relationship with his daughter, who is bitter and angry because McCoy left her mother 20-odd years ago, and she really hasn't grown up with him or has had a father in all that time. And that's why she's kind of leaning toward the Vulcan as kind of like a father figure. But the Vulcan also, we find out, is ill and has something going on with him. So he falls ill, and that's a kind of a subplot that's going on throughout the book. Meanwhile, Kirk finds out that the inhabitants of this planet, the ape-like inhabitants, started off as just animals with no intelligence. And what we get here is interesting. We get another floating head exposition scene that we talked about in my Gold Key review. A good comic book trope, and it does help to advance the plot. We find out that several years ago, aliens came down and gave the inhabitants of the planet symbionts and the technology to create these symbionts. And the symbionts would boost their intelligence and take them from beyond non-thinking animals to intelligent beings. Wondering if this could be Trills. This is way beyond the establishment of the Trill in Star Trek: The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, but it certainly sounds like it could be the Trills. And we find out that basically the Klingons are here because what they want to do is they want the mining rights for this planet. They can't get them while the intelligent life lives on the planet. So what they're going to do is they're going to find out about these symbionts and destroy the inhabitants' ability to manufacture them. And that way they go back to becoming non-thinking humanoids, and they have an easier case of stealing the mining rights and taking over the planet. And as Clegg says, kind of an interesting skirt around the Organian peace treaty, don't you think? Because, of course, the Organians stopped any kind of fighting or warring that the Klingons and the Federation would partake in. And that's a very interesting idea in the book. And that's why this comic goes beyond a lot of the Marvel comics of the era, which really had a lot of like vampires, ghosts, and so forth. So I thought this was a pretty decent story. So as McCoy is taking double duty here of trying to figure out what's going on with his daughter's boyfriend, he's also trying to figure out what's going on with the simians. And we get several scenes of that happening. I like this ape with the glasses here. It kind of reminds me of, definitely reminds me of the Planet of the Apes comic books and so forth. So we have a confrontational scene here toward the end with Kirk and Clag, who basically fesses up to what they're doing. And then the Klingon battlecruiser somehow disables the Enterprise's shields, and they're helpless in space. Meanwhile, Sky's looking for a way around that. So once we get toward the end of the book, we basically get some revolts from the inhabitants. A little warring between the Klingons and Captain Kirk, where McCoy's daughter does eventually gets captured, taken hostage, and then it's up to Kirk to kind of resolve the whole situation. And what they do is they find the manufacturing facility for the symbionts. They transfer the data from the aliens' computers to their own ship, so that the Klingons can't get their hands on them. And then they defeat the aliens, defeat the Klingons, and then they're basically able to transfer the information back to the inhabitants and go back and create the symbionts all over again. It's a very interesting story, and I definitely think it's one of the better ones that Marvel produced at this time period. Of course, at the end of the story, Dr. McCoy doesn't really resolve the boyfriend's disease. He gives himself up, fighting the Klingon, and they're killed in an explosion. And Dr. McCoy's daughter ends up going back to the planet. And there's a nice little scene here at the end of the book here where McCoy talks to Kirk and then eventually to Spock, and questions what type of person he is for being prejudiced against the daughter's boyfriend for being a Vulcan. Spock says, well, basically it makes you human, Captain Dr. McCoy. And there's a nice little trio, very reminiscent of what we would get at the end of all the Star Trek episodes. And at the end, Dr. McCoy beams down to the planet, and he's hoping to resolve his differences with his daughter. And then the tale ends on an upbeat note. So I really enjoyed this comic. We'll look at a few of the other ones from Marvel, but they weren't as well plotted as this issue. And I really enjoyed that they finally got around to exploring the relationship between Dr. McCoy and his daughter after really teasing it and having several non-starts of doing it in the past. And that's issue 13. So we'll be back to wrap up the video. I hope you enjoyed this look at issue 13 of Marvel Comics Star Trek. Okay, that's a look at issue 13 of the Marvel Star Trek comic series today. The best Star Trek always dealt with the characters and their interpersonal relationships. And this particular comic was really enjoyable because it dealt with McCoy and his life beyond Starfleet, something we didn't see a whole lot of in the original series or any of the movies, really dealt with primarily in a novel series. So it's nice to get this look at the relationship with his daughter and a little background on Dr. McCoy. I hope you've enjoyed these looks at Star Trek in the comics. And I hope if you do really like it, then you'll go ahead and like this video. And please go ahead and subscribe. We'll be doing these videos hopefully daily where we look at Star Trek in the comics and all its iterations, whether it be Marvel, IDW, DC, or even the Eagle Moss collection. So definitely subscribe and leave your comment below what you'd like to see me cover in a future video. So I want to thank you all for stopping by, checking out my video, and have a fantastic day. And don't forget, keep trekking.